welcome to Unite Planet. We're in the room of the cams today, in Skype room. So we're going to do a chat with Andrew Johnson here. You can see him right there on the camera. We're going to be covering, well, mainly I think what's happening now in the world with all the coronavirus and the COVID-19 stuff that's going off and putting the world in lockdown, and we'll be discussing the many factors of that. So I'd like to welcome everyone. Hello, Andrew. Hello, Paul. Hello, Bernie.
Hello.
Whoa. So let's get started. We'll start with Andrew, as it's always polite to, and Andrew's the one with all the knowledge here. He's the one that's done immense research on this. So Andrew, can we just start in asking just what first kind of gave the indication that this whole coronavirus was not what we're being told?
Well, I think really the first thing was that I was comparing it to what happened in 2009 with the swine flu.
Yeah.
And because when that started, I was pretty sure that was going to be a scam, the way it was panning out, because they basically said, oh, you know, we're getting more and more cases, and, you know, it's going to be really bad, and then we might have to declare a pandemic. And then they talked about, because both my kids were still at school then, they've both since left school since then, and they talked about, oh, if we get one more case in Nottinghamshire, we're going to have to close the school. And I'm thinking, well, one more case in the whole of Nottinghamshire? I can't even, it might not have been that, but it was something that sounded really stupid that they were going to close the school for over, and they didn't close the school at that point. And then there was some weird stuff going off at where my wife worked at the Queen's at Nottingham at the time. And so I saw that same pattern kind of coming out. I think it was probably, I can't remember the date now, sort of mid-February, late February, early March, whenever it was. There was making the same sort of noises in the media that, oh, there's this pandemic coming, and ooh, it was getting really bad in China. And I think, I can't remember where it, but we had that SARS before that, didn't we? And it was all sort of a replay of the same sort of story. And then I thought, oh, it'll all blow over, you know, they're not going to get away with it. But I can't remember when it kicked off. Worse than that, I think they were saying they were going to do some particular measures. I can't remember what it was. But then before we knew it, they said, oh yeah, we're going into lockdown. And in fact, I got an email off somebody, a chap who lives in Coventry, and he sent me an email. I think it was like Tuesday or Wednesday, and he said they were going to declare lockdown, and I thought, no, they're not. So so that really, you know, once I saw that going on, I thought, well, this is probably going to get quite serious, which of course it has. But it was interesting that this guy in Coventry said that he's somebody that knew somebody that was in the MOD, and they knew that, you know, he must have known a few days before that it was planned. So that in of itself was suspicious.
I think I was saying that people in our position and a lot who watch Unite Planet and of course follow your work, Andrew, I think a lot of us would be questioning this anyway, don't we? But we do that anyway. You know, it's just that the regular people, if you like, call them regular, they will just go with the narrative, the official narrative. So I guess we all kind of came about this information at the same kind of point, almost, you know, but probably in different angles, or, you know, but we all questioned it. Yeah.
It might be I'm just going to have to pass something out of the room to somebody, so I'll just be a sec.
Yeah, no problem.
So yeah, and I think then there was this website called The Canary, where they'd actually got an article about all the legislation they got planned, which was basically, you know, an outline of essentially getting something pretty close to martial law. Yeah. And that was in the bill. I think it was called the coronavirus bill, and I think they'd either tabled that. They tabled that, I think, in late January, or was it late February? But it was quite early on, I think, and so they'd obviously got that ready, and I think it was 360 pages long if you actually read the whole. I didn't read the whole thing, but it was quite a lengthy, quite a lengthy piece of legislation. And they had this write-up on this website called The Canary. I hadn't seen that website before, but it's sort of like an independent news site. a bit like the Off Guardian site, which is another one that seems to have become quite popular now. But they sort of just, I don't know, they're a bit different to the mainstream. They carry some of the stuff, but of course it's all what I would call limited hangout. Yeah. And I said to them, you know, I wrote to this Canary website and said, well, when are you going to show people the truth about what happened in 2009 and what the World Health Organization did, where they put this document out in 2005. And I'll read from the document, because this is kind of like one of the keys to it, really, of what's going on. And you can see on this document, it's still on their website. Let's see. And I wrote in this, because I'll come to this report that I've done a bit later, but in 2005, an unelected group, in fact, I don't know if I could share my screen here. I might even be able to share my screen. Let's just see if I can do that. In 2005, an unelected group of World Health Organization officials produced a document containing guidelines for signatory states entitled WHO Checklist for Influenza Pandemic Preparedness Planning. So this is 15 years ago, just about. Wow. And there's the reference. It's still there. You can go and read it. During a pandemic, it may be necessary to overrule existing legislation or individual human rights. Examples are the enforcement of quarantine. What does that remind you of? Overruling individual freedom of movement. What does that remind you of? Use of privately owned buildings for hospitals, off-license use of drugs, compulsory vaccination, implementation of emergency shifts in essential services. These decisions need a legal framework to ensure transparent assessment and justification of the measures that are being considered and to ensure coherence with international legislation, international health regulations. And so what's that? That's exactly what they've got in this bill that they put into Parliament. So that's when I realised that they were putting that into action. You know, that was already in front of Parliament. And by then, all the scare stories, you know, we'd seen these people we'd seen these videos of people dropping dead in the street in China, which of course could be crisis actors for all we know. We don't know if that was a real people. We don't know even if it was in China. We just saw these videos of Chinese-looking people falling onto the pavement wearing face masks. And I think on the basis of that and maybe a few other things, that's what they used to kick it all off. And the thing that I quickly found out when I started looking a bit deeper, of course, because I knew that some people already called the WHO not the World Health Organization, but the World Homicide Organization, to use an American term. And that was all discussed in 2009. So I'd already seen all that, came out in the swine flu scam, and I was looking at that probably for about 3 or 4 months, back between sort of February and March, April time, and sort of September 2009. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But if you look at this Tedros Adhanom guy, now he's you might have seen this already now. Anyone that hasn't, it's worth looking into this. He's the chief executive, and that's a funny word for a health organization, isn't it? Executive. I don't know if that's his official title, but he's sometimes called an executive, I think. And if you look at some parts of the WHO website, he does not have a medical degree. Tedros Adhanom is from Ethiopia, does not have a medical degree. He's got a degree in community health studies from the University of Nottingham. I should say a PhD rather. So he is a PhD, he is a doctor, but he's not a doctor of medicine. He doesn't have a medical degree. It's more like sociology. So what does he know about pandemics in terms of virology or anything like that? Next to nothing. And he's strongly connected to cases of human rights abuses in Ethiopia. And he was actually the third most powerful person in the TPLF, which I think is something like the People's Liberation Front.
Yeah, I read about this, yeah.
Right, exactly. So communist, that's the key word here. Communist Revolutionary Party in Ethiopia, that was listed as the 6th most powerful terrorist organization. Sorry, it was listed as a terrorist organization in the 90s and as a political arm of a minority ethnic group, which was 6% of the population. And they reportedly conducted systematic discrimination and human rights abuses against the majority ethnic group. And Adhanom also appointed, this is a key one, Robert Mugabe as a goodwill ambassador to the WHO. I mean, come on.
It's a bit like when they appointed Tony Blair as the envoy of Middle East, peace envoy of Middle East, and it's just crazy.
Exactly.
It's like when I got Jimmy Savile to be a babysitter.
Yeah. I mean, we shouldn't laugh, should we? But you're absolutely right.
It's the mentality that we're dealing with, really. You know.
Yeah. So, you know, with that sort of pedigree, you can see where it's going, and you've got a communist or former communist leader helping to implement world communism, which is essentially where we're at currently. Now, whether we can push it back, you know, or how far we can push it back, I really don't know at this point. I mean, just to mention, we were going to do this interview face to face. We would have done that, but there were certain concerns. I certainly would have done it, but I've had some domestic changes in circumstances here. So there was talk of Johnny coming here, but it wouldn't really have been easy. So I'm not afraid of this. You know, virus. There is no real virus. There's no virus other than the one that everybody's already got, basically. It is just, and you know, without going through all the details, which we'll probably get to in a few minutes, some of them at least, it's basically all the data that's come in now has suggested that it might be just slightly worse than an ordinary seasonal flu. That's all it really is. And if you actually get rid of all the crap and the politicization of all the figures, you know, and all of that, it is basically just another seasonal flu that's behind it all, and that's all it is. But because of the way that it's been presented, you know, it's like 9/11. They've set up this story, they've set up this narrative, they've had all their ducks in a row, and they've pushed them out in order. The media is fully compliant. There's no real serious question in the media. There's been a few skeptical stories coming out, a few doctors that have been reported saying, "Oh, we don't agree with these measures," blah 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 blah. But that hasn't been enough to actually get the government to say, "Yeah, okay, we need to reverse these measures," and that needs to happen. These measures have actually made things worse, as we know, far worse.
I mean, you never get this kind of discussion on the BBC, would you? They'll never entertain the idea of it, you know. And this is the problem, you know.
It is. You know, you might get 10 minutes. Oh, we've got this guy from somewhere who thinks this, but then they'll just keep on churning out. So many people have died, and they won't tell you, for example, that they've changed the way that they report the deaths. And that's on the Office of National Statistics website. It's on the CDC website. So, you know, I will say to somebody, this is all a scam, and they'll say, no, it's not. People are dying. People are dying. But, you know, my next question to them would be, let's take the UK as an example, because that's the place I've collected the figures for, and I can ask you guys this question. Any idea how many people die every year in the UK? Without, you know, going to look at a website, what would you think? How many people die on average in the UK every year?
What, a collective?
All deaths, everything all totted up.
Would say something about 1.5 million, something like that?
No, it's a bit high, that, but
okay,
it's 500,000.
Right.
So about 500,000 people. I've got the figures for, and we'll come back to these figures. 2008 was 507,000 total deaths for that year. 2009, 490,000. 2010, 492,000. And that's from the Office of National Statistics website. I'll come back to those figures in a short while. But if you divide that down, and I'm just gonna, you know, I'll do another quick screen share here. Now, if I do 500,000 on my Windows calculator divided by 365, there you go. So every day, every single day, 1,300 odd people die in the UK. That's quite a lot of people. That's quite a lot of people, you know. So if somebody reports that, you know, 10 people have died from coronavirus in a given city, that's actually about average, you know. And what they're actually doing is they're actually now changing. In fact, I've got going back to this report, because this is the one that I've written. They're actually changing the way that they record deaths. So 3912 deaths occurred in March 2020, so that's a whole month, 91% had at least one pre-existing condition, while 349, 9% had none. So there's no, in other words, when you actually look at all the figures and take them all apart, there is no extra death, or very little extra death from this supposed COVID-19. There's still the same number of people dying every month. And it says between 1st and 31st March 2020, there were this many deaths occurred in England, Wales, blah, 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 blah. Our definition of COVID-19 includes some cases where the certifying doctor suspected the death involved COVID-19, but was not certain. For example, because no test was done. So they're actually counting some deaths based on suspicion. No test is involved. So what's happening, you see, is for people to understand this, we're now getting to the situation, and anybody can go and check this. Care has been taken away from people. They're not going to hospital because they're scared of catching the virus, because of the fear of God that's been put into them. Their, you know, basic sort of regular care, maybe that happens once every 2 or 3 weeks, once a week, maybe a change of medication, you know, whatever we might think of that, minor surgery, dressing of wounds, treating of minor infections, all those things. Now we're at the point where wherever lockdown started, we're what 3 weeks into it now, whatever it was. A lot of those people are starting to suffer, and some of them are going to die. So they're going to be taken to hospital in a bad state, either close to death. And that's the other thing that Dr. Kaufman pointed out. When you're in your neighborhood, you don't normally see dead bodies coming out of houses, do you? You normally see an ambulance, you know, and maybe somebody being wheeled out in a wheelchair or helped out by, or, you know, if you see somebody that they might have been knocked down in the street by a car or something horrible like that. But you wouldn't normally see somebody being carried out with a cover over them out of somebody's house. But that's going to become more of a regular occurrence with the current situation, because people are staying at home. They're going to be either really ill at home or die at home, and people are going to think, oh God, it's this killer virus. No, they might have had that condition for 30 years, you know, cancer, whatever. And they're not going to go to hospital, they're not going to go to A&E, and they're going to die or become seriously ill at home, and they're going to be carried out. So you're going to see this more and more. And then they get to the hospital and they're just put down, oh, they'll test for coronavirus. Oh, did they have it? Well, no, it just looks like coronavirus. We'll put that down anyway. So, and I think we're actually now seeing this spike now in the death figures now. And that's why I put this in the report. But certainly putting together this report, because I thought what I had to do was get all the information together. And there's basically 4 claims that you know, we can think about which they're running this scam on. So I thought, right, well, let's look at the 4 claims. The first one is that they found a new virus. It's this new mystery virus. No, it's not flu. It's not a cold. It's COVID-19. This mystery virus, you know, that's come out of China. It's coming. It might be bioengineered. It's some mysterious virus. That's the first sort of claim. The second claim is that it's killed tens of thousands of people worldwide, particularly in China, so it's a killer virus. It's said the third claim is it's highly infectious, you know, and the fourth claim is it can be dangerous and even fatal. The second claim is it's killed a lot of people, and the fourth claim is it could kill a lot of people because it's so deadly. So I look at each of those 4 claims in this report that I've done and try and pick them apart and look at what data you can find to support each of those claims. And the first claim is that it's a novel virus. Well, you can immediately dispute this claim, because if you look at this, the way they test people, they're using what's called a PCR test, a polymerase chain reaction test. And that's what they call a qualitative test, which means that you can say, well, there's something there which resembles this protein sequence. So they're saying, well, this particular new virus has a particular sequence of protein molecules in it, and we can test this person's saliva or whatever it is, or blood sample or whatever it is they have, and then if you can see that same protein sequence in that person, then they've got the virus, which proves that they've been infected with it. But that's a qualitative test, because you can't tell how much of the virus they've got. Have they had a heavy infection? Have they ingested it a lot? Or is it that what they're doing is they're just finding a protein sequence which is similar to the virus, but it's not really the same. It might be like 80% the same or 90% the same. But that doesn't mean it's the virus. It just means that that person has some tissue or some cells in their saliva or in the blood which match this alleged sequence that's allegedly in the virus. They haven't, in other words, they don't take your cells from your body with a swab or a blood test or whatever it is, and then actually put that under a microscope or an electron microscope and see the actual virus and say, yep, it's that particular shape, that's it. They're looking for what's called, it's a surrogate test. So they're looking for an effect or a factor that's in the virus and claiming that that's it. So this test it gives, by some measures, an 80% false positive rate. So that could mean that 80% of people that they test don't even have the virus. They just have a protein sequence that looks something similar to this claimed virus.
It's just like the genetic material that they find that Andy Kaufman was talking about, wasn't it, when they do the tests? Yeah.
Right. So so tens of thousands of people have died of this thing allegedly, but what that really means is they've tested tens of thousands of people who have died from something, and then they're claiming that they've died of the virus, when really the more accurate description, they've died with the virus. And okay, you know, some of them do have respiratory symptoms and so forth, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they've died of the virus. Okay, so that's the second claim. You can dispute that really on the basis of the first claim being, not very secure. This virus is indeed a novel virus, and you can actually prove that it killed people. So the test is the underlying problem here, which has caused everything else really. So the next one then is the virus is highly infectious. So how infectious really is it? Well, again, if you argue that everyone has already got this protein sequence or something very close to it, then you could say that it's 100% infectious because everyone's already got it from, and some people apparently can get it from previous flu jabs, because they'll put this protein or something very similar to it in a flu jab or another vaccination. So the people that test positive could have had it from an earlier vaccination. But let's take this idea that yes, you get a group of people together in close proximity, and they cough, they sneeze, they whatever, and this virus spreads by the air droplets or whatever it is to other people's mouths and noses and so forth, and it gets into them. What would ideal conditions for that to happen be? Well, how about a cruise ship packed with hundreds of people in close proximity, with nobody allowed to leave, with air conditioning, with no real medical filtering, going on for 2 weeks? What would that be like for an infectious environment, do you think? I'd say that'd be pretty good, wouldn't you?
For the Herrings and the Goldmans, the cruise was idyllic.
This was our first trip to Southeast Asia, so we're excited about seeing Japan. We went to Vietnam, Hong Kong, Taiwan, so that was a thrill.
That is until an uninvited passenger made its way on board. COVID-19, aka the coronavirus.
That theory about A, the virus being infectious, and B, it being deadly, that'd be a pretty good way of getting a lot of people very poorly fairly quickly, wouldn't it? Potentially.
Yeah.
And I think that Diamond Princess, I need to check out this story a bit more, had one person that died, and they were about in their 80s, I think. I think they had that whole story about the Diamond Princess didn't even support the narrative. It just didn't support the narrative. So, and then looking at other figures, again, if you compare now that we've had this lockdown going on in various places for several weeks now, if you actually look at the countries that have had lockdown based against those that haven't, then there's really not a lot of difference in the figures. I haven't got the figures to hand, but there are, you can check these on various websites, and there's a very good sequence of videos by a chap called Andrew Mather, who's run a sequence of videos called Coronavirus Fact Not Fear, And he argues that looking analytically at the figures, the published figures, that there's no appreciable difference between the countries that have had lockdown and the countries that haven't had lockdown in terms of the number of cases. The number of cases that appear in the records are based on things like population density and the number of people tested. So in other words, as we said, because it appears that this is quite a common protein or whatever it is, or sequence they're testing for, the more people you test, the bigger the figures are going to be. So the number of cases that are reported are more likely to be a reflection on the number of people that have been tested than it is than actual infections.
And they want to push more tests out, aren't they, as well? You hear that a lot.
Yeah, because they can sell they're selling test kits. They make money off them. They're not giving these out altruistically. They're selling them for like $20, $30, $50 a throw. Whatever if the figure is. So again, you can call that claim into question. So yeah, and also going back to the death reports, for example, just momentarily, we have this account from Italy where they'd had apparently a high number of deaths in Italy, and there was a big scare about this, because there was apparently this route between Wuhan and Italy, and basically they claimed that they'd had all these deaths in Italy, but then when they reviewed the records carefully after all the scares and hype had died down a bit, 99% of those who died from the virus had other illnesses, Italy says, and that was in Bloomberg in the 18th of March 2020. And we've had a very similar report on the BBC, I think just about 3 or 4 days ago. Not quite worded the same, but very similar to that. And then we've had this article from the Daily Telegraph. The way in which we code our deaths in our country is very generous, in the sense that all the people who die in hospitals with coronavirus are deemed to be dying of coronavirus. Does that sound familiar? So in other words, they've done exactly the same in the USA, in Italy, and in the UK now. They've run exactly the same scam, and they've run exactly the same psy-op. 8 o'clock on a Thursday, you go out and you clap the NHS. They've done that in India, they've done it in Spain, they've done it in Italy. What's that about? How's that going to help? You're supposed to stay inside. You're supposed to stay inside to stop spreading the virus. Yeah, you don't go outside and clap people. That's clapping your hands is going to have virus on it. It's going to go into the air. It's going to kill people. If you go outside and clap the NHS, you're a killer.
It's the narrative as well. You see in like news, they'll never word it as people have died from COVID, or say after contracting it or after being tested positive. They'll never just to call themselves it because they know it's a scam. The other scams, isn't it? Oh, this incident is thought to be terrorist related. Yeah. Or not terrorist related. Quite often they'll say, "Oh, this incident is not thought to be terrorist related" when there's been a shooting or something. But then again, going back to the UK death figures, I'm skipping around a little bit here, not too much. I'll just share my screen again momentarily so that you can see this part. And this document that I'm showing you is the actual Word document. And you can download this from this new website that I've created, which I'll show you in a minute. But you can see here from the Office of National Statistics website, I got the total number of deaths. I calculated the total number of deaths, which is very easy. It's just totaling 3 months for the first 3 months of these 4 years. And there's the figures again. Office of National Statistics website, UK figures. So we had 164,000 in 2018, which is 10,000 more than this year. And that apparently is 2018 was recognised as a bad year for flu deaths. But we didn't have a lockdown for 2018 that I recall. So it's the same story. It's the same story. It's crazy, isn't it?
So Now then, so let's just take a step back to 2009. I may have shown this before, because in fact, no. Let me get to claim 4. The virus is dangerous and it can be fatal. Well, again, we have this declaration on the UK government's own website. There's quite a lot of people posted this on Facebook. A lot of people became aware of this. As of 19th of March 2020, COVID-19 is no longer considered to be a high consequence infectious disease. And that's on the government's own website. It's on the government's own website. The Advisory Committee on Dangerous Pathogens is also of the opinion that COVID-19 should no longer be classed as an HCID. So the government's own website contradicts the narrative which has been put out by the mainstream media. At least it did on the 19th of March. Again, I haven't been to this page in the last couple of weeks. It stayed like this for at least 2 weeks. At least 2 weeks. I haven't been to click. I could click on it now to see if it is. But the same thing has happened in the US. This Anthony Fauci guy, who's the pandemic advisor to Trump, he actually republished a paper on the 26th of March in the New England Journal of Medicine, which is a prestigious journal of medicine. If one assumes that the number of asymptomatic or minimally symptomatic cases is several times as high as the number of reported cases, the case fatality rate is maybe considerably less than 1%. This suggests that the overall clinical consequences of COVID-19 may ultimately be more akin to those of a severe seasonal influenza, which has a case fatality rate of approximately 0.1%, similar to those in 1957 and 1968. So that's Trump's right-hand guy on this. He's telling you it's no worse than normal flu. And they essentially said the same on the British website. So this is how they're getting away with it. They've told everyone what the truth is. Yeah. It's just that they've put all the hype into the media and everyone's going, oh, don't come near me. I had some woman at the post office the other day told me to F off because I got too close to her, and I was telling her it's a scam. And she said that she knew 2 people that had died, and I sort of apologised for that. But even she then went on to say that they both had health conditions. One of them was quite elderly, so it was the same story again. And then we got Prince Charles, Saxe-Coburg. Not Windsor, Saxe-Coburg, that's his real name. He got better. He's in the vulnerable group. Bojo, he got better, didn't he? And Scottish Health Chief Catherine Calderwood, she went to a holiday home during lockdown in early April 2020, so she's obviously not bothered. But Bojo didn't go into isolation. He went to Chequers, just was sort of shuffled off there. Tom Hanks, he was reported as having it. He had no symptoms. He got better. Mikel Arteta, the Arsenal boss, he got it, got better. So what picture is emerging? Well, it's a picture which is exactly consistent with what Fauci told us and what the UK government told us.
I mean, with the Tom Hanks one, just to jump in a little bit, I'm sorry about that, but with Tom Hanks, he posted, I think it was on Instagram or Twitter, a picture of him. It got his typewriter, and it was a Corona Smith typewriter. So
that's right. They're
taking the piss, aren't they? Really? It's just it's incredible, really. But
Lady Gaga did the same thing, didn't she, with her video?
Yeah.
Who did? Sorry.
Lady Gaga did the same.
Oh yeah. Oh, yeah. Lady Gaga. Yeah.
They're up to the necks in it, man.
It's now my great pleasure to invite Lady Gaga.
I would like to thank the World Health Organization and the United Nations, as well as Global Citizen. Thank you very much, Dr. Tedros and Hugh Evans, for all of your leadership in this fight against COVID-19. And thank you very much to the World Health Organization for asking me to collaborate with you on this special. We are raising money for the World Health Organization's COVID-19 Solidarity Response Fund. And 7 days ago, we held a call with more than 68 corporate leaders from some of the world's biggest and most generous companies. And I asked them to join my corporate kindness list, as there have been many corporations and philanthropists that have been very, very generous during this time. Since then, we have also been calling on philanthropists around the world as well. and tech companies included. It has been an honor to help with this huge broadcast event, which will take place on April 18th.
Well, Lady Madonna, lying on the bed, listen to the pretty music in your head.
Unself quarantine in honor and respect for COVID-19.